Okay, here we go. All right, what is going on, Coaching Collective? Here we are with call number 3, circadian rhythm deep dive. So before we get into this, for all of you guys here right now and everybody who watches this, I always want it to be known, this is not a gospel. I am not Jesus Christ himself. I am not telling you that this is the truth of all things, and there is nothing that can be argumented about this. This is merely my own interpretation of data over the last 10 years. And I am encouraging you guys to also share your interpretation of these data as well. Okay. So I am going to get into the presentation here and then we will deep dive. Let me share my screen. Okay. 2 seconds. Cool. So let's do this. Hang on. Why is this thing in my way? Does anybody know how I can move? Does anybody know how I can move this bar up here?
You can just like
I can quite literally just grab it and move it. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna put you guys up here. There we go. So Coaching Collective call number 3, circadian rhythms. What are circadian rhythms? So circadian rhythms are physical, mental, and behavioral changes that follow a 24-hour cycle. I think it's important to note that not all of them follow 24 cycles. Some of them can follow less, some of them can follow more. So I do disagree with the description of circadian rhythm, but this is the actual definition of it. So these natural processes respond primarily to light and dark and affect most living things, including animals, plants, and microbes. So who can give me one example of a circadian rhythm? Anyone?
Sleep.
Sleep. Cool. Awake sleep cycle. Perfect. Let's move on. So let me move you guys again. I'm gonna have to move you guys a couple of times. I put this thing up and it was a gradient, and that was dumb because a lot of these words are black and you can't read them in the top section, but it's okay. So circadian rhythm is based off of chronobiology. What is chronobiology? I'll read you guys the definition. It's a field that studies the effects of time on biological systems. So I want you guys to think about our circadian rhythm as one massive clock, right? One big biological clock. And then we have multiple other biological clocks inside our body that are regulated off of this one big clock. Does that make sense? Cool. So the data obtained from chronobiological studies reveal methods that manipulate circadian rhythms. The effect of light and melatonin on circadian rhythms are determined by these studies. So that's kind of like the main studying that's done and data that's collected with the study of chronobiology. Okay. Now this is just kind of a little, I've got a couple other better ones here coming soon, but basically it's just kind of showing you a time clock of how things shift, bowel movements, when melatonin secretion starts. It's on the freaking military time. So I don't even know what time's what, except I know that this is midnight and this is noon, right? Everything else in between, your own interpretation. If you guys want to take a screenshot of this and look at it later, not a big deal. This is not that big of a focus. This was just a picture I merely put up so it looked pretty. Moving on. There are 4 biological rhythms inside of circadian rhythms. Okay, so alongside the circadian rhythm. So we have normal circadian rhythms, which is a 24-hour cycle that includes physiological and behavioral rhythms like sleeping. So whoever said that, great job, right? When we go to bed and when we wake up, usually about 24 hours total. Diurnal, I don't know if I'm saying that right? Rhythms, the circadian rhythm synced with day and night. So this is a 12-hour cycle. Ultradian rhythms are biological rhythms with a shorter period and higher frequency than circadian rhythms. So think multiple times a day, every 4 hours. And then infradian rhythms, biological rhythms that last more than 24 hours. This can be a woman's menstrual cycle is technically an infradian rhythm. Okay, does everybody get that? So here we go. This is your main biological clock right here, whatever you want to say it. Now, what features do our biological clock have? It's a remarkable timing system. It can measure local time of the day and lapse of time. Think about when you're up, like, oh man, anytime I'm up past this amount, or I'm up for this many hours, or I don't eat for this many hours, I start getting super tired. That's your biological clock working. It's all geared towards us. It's synchronized to environmental cues. We've heard of homeostasis, right? Where you are, your body then so will adapt, right? Because that's what your biological clock does. It's always adapting. It's under genetic control. So genetics have a huge thing here. It's free running, meaning you don't need to change the batteries. Converts overt biological rhythms, temperature compensated, and then it's related to various disorders. So we'll dive into this a little bit deeper in these next couple of slides. Examples of circadian rhythms. So we have the sleep-wake cycle. We have the body temperature cycle. We have the hormone secretion cycle, the menstrual cycle. Those two are kind of one and the same. Or they're both, I guess, an example of one the other. And then hibernation is a really good example, right? It's not just humans that have circadian rhythms. Any questions on these? Cool. So this is really important, and this is where we start being able to. So now we know what they are and kind of what they make up. So now we start getting into kind of how this can be construing a client's progress, or what our clients can be doing to offset their circadian rhythm, and us what we need to fix in order to have them realign this circadian rhythm. So habitual actions that are offsetting circadian rhythm. This is huge in today's society. We are staying up later than ever. We are consuming more caffeine than ever. We are eating like shits. We have the most amount of screen time possible through video games and Instagram and computers. We're inside the entire time because of this. We are stressed out because we are constantly worried about likes, engagement. This person looks better than me, everything else in between. And then we have a terrible nighttime routine. Pretty much all of these is everybody's life. If you look at like the typical, I wouldn't say typical, but you look at like the standard norm for like a college kid, this is basically their life, right? They're staying up late, they're over consuming drinks, they're eating top ramen because they don't have an actual kitchen, everything in between. So when it comes to, and we can see so many things off with clients from this, if they're overly fatigued throughout the day, if they're putting on more fat, that doesn't make sense. If they're not losing fat, if they can't build muscle, if they can't get good pumps in the gym, if they're overly stressed, if they can't fall asleep, right? There's all of these things that are going to offset a client's progress because their habits are offsetting their natural biological clock. Does that make sense? Cool. Let's go deeper. Question. So this one, I would probably suggest you guys take a screenshot of, or just take a picture of, because this is what I would deem as questions that you would want to ask a client. Yeah, get in there. Good. So these are questions that I would say to ask the client to see if they have some sort of circadian rhythm disorder. So what time do you naturally prefer to go to bed / get up? We'll get into like the actual ideal times here later. These are just questions to ask. And I'm sure you guys can kind of understand what direction would be which based off of how they would answer these. But is it easier for you to go to bed later and get up later? If you could sleep your own hours, what would they be? Because some people are complete night owls, right? People go, oh man, I don't get it. I thrive being awake at night while they're like 40 pounds overweight, right? And can't lose fat. And they're like, oh, my body just loves it. I'm like, your body quite literally is showing you how much it hates it. Like we are not nocturnal beings. So that's a huge red flag for me. If you could sleep your preferred hours, would you have any trouble sleeping? Do you do shift work? What shifts do you prefer? We'll get into that in a second. Have you always kept these hours since childhood? Remember, biological clocks can be genetic, right? It can be a genetic thing, and it can also be an environment thing. If mom and dad are up late 24/7 and let the kids up, they're going to be fucked for a very, very, very long time. Have you always awakened before, gone to bed later than your peers? Is there anyone in your family who prefers to go to bed really late or get up early? Does your bedtime move around the clock in a regular fashion? So those are really important staples if you're really trying to dive into. I think you can pretty much know if a client has an offset circadian rhythm, but I think if we want to really dive in to see like, man, is it like a true like disordered sleep pattern? This is the questionnaire that I would go through. So what do circadian rhythms help us regulate? You can see a list right here. I'll just go through the list. It regulates your sleep. It regulates your appetite, your body temperature, your hormones, your mental cognition, your performance. This performance part I want to touch on because this can translate into every type of performance possible. Sports specific, physical, sexual performance, everything in between can be affected if your circadian rhythm is not helping you regulate it. Blood pressure, reaction times and reflexes. I'm sure you guys have been through that if you're just bogged on sleep and feel like shit, and somebody tells you to catch something, it'll smack you in the face, right? Energy's tanked, and then mood can be tanked. So these are all regulated by circadian rhythm. So I don't know, you guys tell me, if a client's circadian rhythm is not regulated and none of these are regulated, how easy is it going to be for them to make progress? It's gonna be damn near impossible, right?
Nick, I've got a question.
Please.
So obviously, like all of these things, if you aren't getting good sleep, like all of this is going to be affected. So what is like kind of like the difference between, I feel like I'm getting confused between like the circadian rhythm and then like just sleep. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Okay.
Let's try to, I'm just not grasping the way that you're interpreting it. That's all.
Right. So like it says, what does circadian rhythms help us regulate? But like, I'm seeing this as like, what does proper sleep help us regulate? I don't know.
That's the circadian rhythm that we're talking about.
Got it. Okay.
Sleep is a circadian, like that is your circadian rhythm. You wake up with the sun, you go down with the sun. That's your 24-hour circadian rhythm clock.
Gotcha. So and we might get into this, but like, let's say somebody just goes to bed at freaking 2 a.m., but then they wake up at like 11 a.m. or whatever. They're still getting the same amount of sleep. Is it a lot more detrimental to them than somebody like yeah. Okay.
Yes. We will get into that, because remember, there are also rhythms of hormone secretion. So we're going to get into why certain hormones and when certain hormones peak, and why we need to be asleep when those are peaking, and why if we're not, things are going to get super offset. So we'll get into that in a second. Your head is exactly in the right direction though.
Okay.
So this is really important to understand. Cortisol's relationship to circadian rhythm. Who can tell me what cortisol is? Somebody tell me. I want to hear it.
Stress hormone.
Stress hormone. Somebody other than Audrey next time. Other people gotta involve. So cortisol has a particular circadian rhythm that's affected by sleep. We know this. So I want to first say, like, if this is baseline of cortisol, right? When we go to sleep, cortisol is at its lowest. And then as we start to wake up, right? When we wake up in the morning, cortisol is at its absolute peak. That's how we wake up. Okay, so cortisol is at its peak when we wake up, and then it just slowly goes down over the course of the day. Now, chronic elevation of cortisol, that's a whole other study. That's a whole other presentation. But that's, in theory, what your cortisol does, right? So cortisol has a particular circadian rhythm that is affected by sleep. Based on normal physiology, lower levels of cortisol are present at the initial part of sleep, right? That's how we wind down, low stress. Whereas there is an increase at the end of the sleep period, which reaches its peak just minutes before the individual wakes up. Does everybody understand? And does it make sense why when cortisol would be lower, we would be asleep, and why cortisol would be higher, we'd be awake? Is everybody getting that correlation? Cool. The stress hormone cortisol is produced in the HPA axis, which is also coordinate to your sleep cycle, or also helps coordinate your sleep cycle. Sorry. When the HPA axis is disrupted through poor nutrition, chronic stress, even illness, insomnia is going to happen. And then there's going to be a multitude of other sleep disturbances. Normally, cortisol levels rise during the early morning hours and are highest at 7 a.m. Interesting data point, right? This goes back to what you were talking about, Audrey, right? So cortisol is its highest at 7 a.m. So one of you guys tells me, what would make the most amount of sense if you had a 3-hour time gap to wake up in the morning? Between what 3 hours would make the most amount of sense to wake up optimally? Come on. Come on.
Yeah, say one more time.
So if your cortisol is the highest at 7, and that's the highest when we're supposed to wake up, what makes the most amount of sense of what time, if you had a 3-hour bracket between this time and this time, would make the most amount of sense to wake up optimally?
6 to 9.
Perfect. Yeah, right. That makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Makes sense to me. Okay, so let's move on. Where did I stop? Oh yeah, they drop very low in the evening and during the early phase of sleep. But if you sleep during the day and are up at night, this pattern can actually be reversed, because remember, your biological clocks are super adaptive. Your body is very adaptive to stimulus, environment, everything in between. So cortisol levels are normally lowest around 3 a.m., then begin to rise, peaking around 7 and 8 a.m., right? If you, I think I accidentally just wrote an 8 instead of a 7, so that's my bad. If you routinely wake up hours before dawn in a state of anxiety, your cortisol is overachieving and spiking too early. How many people have had it where they wake up in the middle of the night and they're like, whoa, I'm just so anxious? Yeah. Your circadian rhythm be fucked up, brother. Okay. So again, instead of being like, oh man, I don't know what's going on, now you can go, oh shit, when did I go to sleep? Oh man, it's this time. I really gotta get my sleep back together to get this to not feel this way. So okay, does anybody have a question on cortisol's relationship to a circadian rhythm? I feel like this one was pretty thorough, but if not, if there's a missing link, please let me know.
I got a question. Sorry.
Okay.
So you said it's normally highest around 7 a.m. But again, going back to somebody who goes to bed at 2 a.m., wakes up at 11 a.m., is it still going to be highest for them at 7 a.m. or did their circadian rhythm adapt and potentially it's higher later?
So this would be absolute most optimal for the human body.
Gotcha.
Right. So this is what we want to happen. This is the desired outcome of a circadian rhythm. But like you said, if sleep patterns are off, they can be reversed. It can be all over the place. So now you may have cortisol spiking its peak at 4 a.m. right earlier, and then you don't know why, but you're not awake yet because it's still dark outside. So now your body's up and wired, and you go, man, I'm tossing and turning all night. I'm up at 3 a.m. and I just sit in my bed until my alarm goes off at 6. Right. So then by the time this person starts their day, they're already fucking exhausted. So they go to bed earlier, right? Because it's off. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome.
I answer her question.
Yep.
So like, if there's a client that routinely, like this is just their work schedule and like their training schedule, is there a way for it to be normal? Like for them to, like she said, say, for example, they go to bed around 2 a.m. every day. Like, is there a way for that to be a normal thing, or you always want them to be in like the standard that you're talking about?
Well, so again, this is the 100% desired outcome, right? No matter what, this is a desired outcome. This does not mean that if we end up, and I'm going to show you guys why with the hormone secretion levels later on at certain times, that'll make this make a little bit more sense to you. But again, this is your own interpretation of this data as well. If your circadian rhythm is super off, let's just say it's completely backwards, right? Would it be more optimal to just accept, hey, my circadian rhythm is backwards, and try to keep that as consistent as possible if that's what's working for our schedule right now? Would it?
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
if you don't,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
What makes the most amount of sense? That makes sense to me, right? If I can't have somebody in the desired range and they absolutely have to be in the different range, well, I want to make sure you're in that range consistently so we can at least try to have some sort of regulation. Cool. Okay. Now, because I thought somebody was going to ask what the HPA axis is, here is just a definition of the HPA axis. So the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is our central stress response system. The HPA axis is responsible for the neuroendocrine adaptation components of the stress response. This response is characterized by hypothalamic release of corticotropin releasing factor, cortisol. Cool. Pretty straightforward. I wanted somebody to be like, what's the HPA axis? So I could be like, wait your turn. Didn't hit. Anyways. So what are biological rhythm disorders? So what are these disorders that we're looking at? So any sort of biological rhythm not being in order is a disorder, right? So sleep disorders, that's a biological rhythm. So body is made to sleep at night. And this kind of goes back to answering your question, Audrey and John, as well. The body is made to sleep at night, right? We are coming from millions of years of lineage from ancestors, right? Everybody's sleeping at night. It's been like, 20 years of us being like, I'm going to sleep in the day. Our bodies are just not made for that. So any disruption in the body's natural rhythm can lead to negative affective sleep, insomnia, restlessness, etc. Jet lag is a huge biological rhythm disorder. Has anybody ever had jet lag? Dude, it's miserable. When Allie and I went to the Maldives a couple months ago, I slept half the trip. I was pissed. It wrecked me. So this is a disruption in circadian rhythm from time zone changes or red eye flights, right? That kind of makes sense to everybody. Mood disorders. So this one's interesting. And again, this also goes into like if people are sleeping all day. Lack of exposure to sunlight can lead to conditions like depression, bipolar disorder, seasonal depression, or seasonal affective disorder. It's basically the same thing. Okay. Shift work disorder. A person working outside the typical workday, thus creating a change in typical circadian rhythm. Nurses are the perfect example of this, right? Who knows nurses that are like 3 day shifts on, and then there are 3 night shifts, and then there are 3, right? That's quite literally, it makes me want to rip my fucking hair out when I have clients like that, dude. I'm like, just pick one, tell your hospital to pick one. So moving with that, how long for a disrupted circadian rhythm to reset? It takes roughly 3 weeks. This is really, really important. I would write this down. This is super, super important. So it takes roughly 3 full weeks on a new circadian rhythm for your body to fully adapt to it. So where can this be problematic? I'm so glad you asked. Constant traveling. So if we are going from time zone to time zone, back and forth, we're not really getting ourselves to rest and be in one place for longer than 3 weeks. That's going to be a huge problem that can probably lead to a sleep disorder. Switching from day shift to night shift, right? Like we talked about the nurses, if they've got 3 day shifts one week, 3 night shifts the next week, they don't even have a full week for their circadian rhythms to adapt. So now when we're trying to get a continuous something, we are all over the place. The body has no idea what's going on. And you're quite literally like your biological clock has no idea what time it is, basically. Sporadic party schedule / vacations. This kind of goes with traveling, but college students I'll tie into party schedules. So, I mean, college is party time, right? So let's look at it like this. There's a big game Friday nights. Everybody pre-games Thursday night. Everybody goes out Friday night. Everybody goes up Saturday night. Everybody's out to like 5 a.m. And then the next weekend, everyone's like, well, I'm not going to party this weekend. I'm just going to, get back to my sleep schedule. And then the next weekend, it's an away game. And now everybody parties and parties and parties, right? So we're having 1 week on staying up super late and then 1 week back to normal. Your body is quite literally so confused. Alcohol and stuff's not helping this either by any means. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any questions on this? Any clarifications? Anybody's own interpretations that they just want to speak? I'm the type of person when I'm learning something, I just want to like say it back in my own words so somebody can say, yes, that's right. So if you guys ever want to do that during this, like, please do it.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I have a client actually who insists on fasting, still meets their macros, but insists on fasting, but we've kind of stalled on progress. Could that possibly be, obviously going back, cortisol's peaked at its highest at like 7 and they're fasting, added stress on top of that?
I'm going to have you repeat the question because I was looking in the squares for who was talking that whole time. And I couldn't find it and it was bothering me. I want to see somebody when they're talking to me. Sorry, go ahead and say again.
Sorry, Nick. So I have a client kind of going back. I'm just thinking through my head who insists on fasting. They just feel like their body operates better that way. And if we're talking, obviously cortisol's peaked, highest at 7 a.m. They wake up. Is fasting, and we've kind of stalled with progress. Could fasting be contributing to that? Because obviously we're just adding to stress.
So is she intermittent fasting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So she's basically, so what does her intermittent fasting schedule look like? When's meal 1 and when's the last meal?
Like 1 to 2. And then she's up a little bit later as well. So closer to 9 to 10.
Okay. So I'm assuming she's eating her last meal pretty much right before bed.
Yep.
Okay, so that right there is telling me that there's something a little bit off with her intermittent fasting schedule anyways. Now, it's not like down to the hour, but typically for intermittent fasting to be like the most optimized, they found you're eating in an 8-hour window. So if the first meal is at 1, you want your last meal at 9. And then on top of this, I would say, because no, I do not think that her not eating in the morning is contributing to more stress at all. But what I would do to combat this is when I do intermittent fasting for any of my athletes or myself personally, I will make sure that my last meal before bed is probably not the biggest meal, but significantly high in carbohydrates. Okay. It's going to aid a lot in sleep. Carbohydrates in themselves can reduce cortisol. And fun fact, if you're actually eating carbs before bed, your growth hormone secretion peaks at night. And they've done studies where if you eat a decent amount of carbs before bed, you can actually spike growth hormone activity by, I think it was like 2000%. So like it's a pretty hefty increase just by eating carbs before bed. And to further that, if we eat carbs before bed and it helps us sleep better, I don't know about you guys, but if I got a full belly, dude, I'll fall asleep on a freaking park bench. You know what I mean? So in theory, if eating carbs before bed during intermittent fasting is attributing to higher growth hormone spike, yeah, that's plenty of benefits. But if it's contributing to better and deeper sleep, in return, it's actually going to help us burn more fat. So with that being the stance, eating carbs before bed could technically just help you burn more fat, right? If you look at it in that context. So I don't think that that's necessarily why she's stalling in progress. There might be something you need to look at a little bit deeper. Could be something wrong with hormones. Could be a blood work issue.
Okay.
I would try to see what's going on with her consistent sleep schedule first, and just see how many parts you can automate and regulate first, and then start looking deeper. Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
I have a follow-up question.
Yes, I don't want to show my guides yet.
And maybe I'm kind of stealing like where you're going here. Sorry about that. But
That's
I know you've mentioned before that like it's ideal to train more around like noon based on circadian rhythms. And I know we're supposed to prioritize carbohydrates around working out. So how would you like split that up with getting enough carbohydrates before bed?
So you're just saying like for me, and well, so that was purely for an intermittent fasting protocol.
Okay.
That wasn't for like Gen Pop or like bodybuilding. I don't think intermittent fasting is conducive to bodybuilding whatsoever. General Pop, your regular old soccer mom who wants to go kick the ball around here and there on the weekends. Absolutely. If you don't like eating breakfast, Susan, don't eat it. Not a big deal. But if I had to split it up, I would still probably prioritize about 20-25% of carbs pre and post workout, split up. And then I don't know, maybe let's just say I'm at 300 grams of carbs a day. Say I do, 70 carbs pre, 70 carbs post. I'd probably throw in at least maybe like a 40 carb meal before bed. It doesn't have to be outrageous, just enough to get, a solid spike in insulin.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Okay. Time for my thing. So these are three completely different things around circadian rhythm, but I think going through all of these will give a very good understanding of circadian rhythm in general. So this is going to be where I start talking to you guys about hormone secretions around them. So I want you guys to put your emphasis around this one right here. So let's start in the morning here, right? Between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. So we are in our deepest REM sleep between the hours roughly 3 a.m. Okay, so roughly 3 a.m. or so is where your body is optimized to have its deepest REM sleep. This is where all recovery is going to happen. You recover the most during REM sleep. So from that, 6 a.m. is here. Your melatonin is now not releasing anymore. So there is a timed biological rhythm of hormone secretion of melatonin specifically. If you look up here before, this is roughly 10 o'clock, right? This is roughly 10 o'clock. This is where melatonin starts releasing from a hormonal standpoint. Your body will start secreting melatonin. And this is why you start getting sleepy. So this is why if we're pushing past this and we're going to bed at 2, 3 a.m. when we're supposed to be in our deepest rest, well, it's pretty obvious to see how there can be issues there, right? Okay. So melatonin release stops. You start your day with some sunlight. You guys know this is my shit. Get out, go in the morning, because here's the deal. When it comes to, and this is a really good tip for somebody to reset their circadian rhythm, is I'm always going to do 30-minute walks outside first thing in the morning. If I have somebody who has a big disorder, or if I even have somebody who has really elevated stress levels in their body, I'm going to start them off with waking up first thing in the morning and going on a 30-minute walk outside, no screens, and just allowing their retinas to absorb direct sunlight. And those early morning rays are more infrared rays. And there's a ton of health benefits from absorbing infrared rays from the sun in the early morning. It's a whole other presentation. But so this is where I deem why it's the most optimal for us to train between the hours of 12 and 3. This is my preferred for people. So you have your highest alertness pretty much through here, right? This is where the human performance is the most optimized, from the hours of about 11 to 10 all the way up to about 5. Those are where we are the most optimized, in my opinion. This is my own interpretation. Okay. So if we look at 12, 1, 2, right? So right here, right between the hours of 12 and 3 are where we have our best coordination, our best reaction time, and it's also paired with us being our highest levels of alertness. So what makes the most amount of sense of a time-wise for an athlete to train if we're trying to optimize their performance as a whole? Between the hours of 12 and 3, yes? Is everybody in agreement that that makes the most sense based off of this rhythm right here? Does anybody have an objection or a different interpretation of the data? I would appreciate a different interpretation, honestly, if anybody has it.
Again, I know this is what is like optimal, but let's say like I switched from training at 12 to training at 10, but I also now wake up an hour to 2 hours earlier. So if I consistently do that, even though it might not be optimal, is 10 a.m. kind of like my noon now? Or
Well, no, noon is your noon, because remember, your circadian rhythm is based off the sun.
oh, right. Okay.
That's what our circadian rhythm is based off of, because we have a biological connection to the sun. And like it almost seems like spiritual when you say it like that, right? But like we literally have a biological connection to the sun and the moon. Like our bodies respond a certain way to when the sun is at a certain height in the sky. It's honestly incredible, really. It's honestly super incredible. But would 10 o'clock be your new noon? No. Can you still get an optimal workout at 10 a.m.? Absolutely. I'm not saying that if you don't work out, if you're working out at 11:50, it's not optimal, right? It has to be noon. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we're looking at it as a rhythm and as the biological set peak performance, this is what would happen.
Gotcha.
Okay. But there will be bio differentials between people. Okay. Another quick one here. I'll just go through this one. This one's basically the same thing, right? So this is actually pretty cool. I'll do this one. So noon. So this one, again, different scheduling, but still the same interpretation, right? Best coordination, fastest reactors time, greatest cardiovascular efficiency, and muscle strength is around these times still. So again, something that's really, really important to note. Now, there can be the 5 a.m. squad. That's totally fine. I have no issue if somebody wants to go train at 5 a.m. But here's the thing. More than likely, what's going to happen at the 5 a.m. training squad is you are going to wake up against your will because your body doesn't want to wake up. You're going to go train. You're going to spike cortisol. You're going to come home to eat, and cortisol is going to spike naturally. Does that make sense? If you train at 5, I go home at 7, I'm about to eat my meal. Well, shit, my body's used to, my cortisol secretion starts at 7, 8 a.m. Well, now my stress is super high while I'm trying to eat my post-workout meal. That's not really going to help me too much. Now, going to be different for everybody. Okay. So moving on to here, moving on to this one, just a couple interpretations of it, right? Here's midnight, here's noon. So before this, right, we get a high raise in blood pressure around 6:45. That's going to go with cortisol to help you wake up, right? Because you're obviously asleep. Blood pressure is not really moving that well. So as cortisol comes up, blood pressure is going to increase to start getting things moving. And this is also why, if you guys notice when you wake up first thing in the morning, you're like a little softer, or there's a little bit or more wateriness to you. Maybe like your face is a little swollen. I usually say, wake up, drink a little bit of water, go for a walk, because you're going to allow circulation to happen again. You're going to flush any of that stagnant blood and water that's sitting there, and then you're going to look 10 times better. So just a good tip, especially for your own clients. If they say, oh man, when I wake up, I look like shit. I wish I could send you check-in photos at the gym. It's like, cool. Wake up, drink a small glass of water, go for like a 15-minute walk, then send your check-in photos. You're probably going to look realistic of what you actually look like there. Something that I've started doing recently with prep athletes as well to get a better look on them. Any questions on these right here? I don't want to dive into every single one of them, but they're pretty much the same thing, just different interpretations. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
I have a question. So what if, like, for example, I train Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Tuesday, Wednesdays? Well, Fridays, Tuesday, and Wednesdays, I don't have anybody to keep Sage at noon. So I either have to go later in the afternoons or like really early morning. But then Saturday, Sundays, that's normally when I go is noon. Is it better to do it that way, or would it be better to like train at the same time every single day?
Well, you tell me. Based off of the information available, what's your interpretation?
Well, half of it Sage was talking to me, so I don't really know.
Okay, so
I missed some of it.
again, there's a difference between what works for me and what the absolute most optimal is, right? Again, it's like saying, man, the most optimal thing for you to do is eat chicken 5 times a day. It's like, that's fucking great, but I'm going to eat some steak. You know, like if we want to be absolute peak, most optimal, no possible way we are not exercising to the absolute best of our ability, this is the schedule we follow. Now, if we had absolutely no responsibilities, no children, no schedules, no clients, we can make this happen. Is this realistic for 99% of our population? Probably not. For the ones who are lucky enough to do it, yeah, if we can do this every day, that's amazing. It's not detrimental for you to work out one day, certain times of the week, and then one time a different time of the week. It's not detrimental to you. But with that, if you have to wait, so let's look at this. If you have to wake up and train either super early or a little bit later in the day, based off of the data here, just in these charts that we discussed, which one would deem more optimal than the other? Earlier or later?
I would say earlier, because normally when I train later, I struggle to even go to sleep, and I feel like that like affects all of it.
Do you take caffeine pre-workout before you train?
Not normally, no.
So with the training and stuff closer to bed, yeah, it's not uncommon, because again, when you're training, you're like getting yourself worked up, you know, when we really want to be starting to like settle down and go to bed. So again, your interpretation is, hey, if I work out later, then I have a harder time falling asleep. So in that sense, dude, makes way more sense for your body to be optimized to train earlier. Does everybody get that? I mean, I could train, come home and conk out. I could, but not everybody can do that. Let's move on.
I have a question.
Yes.
Would there be any benefit, especially for an athlete who's maybe like in a health phase or recovery phase, to training around 7 or 8 a.m. when cortisol is already spiked, so that it can spend the rest of the day calming down?
No. Again, peak performance here is this. But if I have somebody who is having like a hormonal restoration problem and I'm not having them train, I'm not having them train. Right. But again, I would much rather you wake up, get your morning sunlight, start your day off, because if cortisol is already spiking, like you're not waking up in a panic, but I don't want you to like, I would rather you start your day with calmness and really like setting things in a smooth motion there. So going up, getting that walk, getting that sunlight in, drinking some water, staying hydrated, and then waiting until we're at our peak performance here to actually start training if we're going to train. Okay.
Cool.
So why don't we just supplement with melatonin, Nick? Well, that's a great question. So let's look at this little graph here. We pretty much talked about all this, right? Melatonin production starts being produced in the evening. It peaks in the middle of the night. This is typically right around 3 a.m., where we are in our deepest REM cycle of sleep. Then as you wake up in the morning, melatonin levels fall so that we can wake up, right? Think of melatonin as like a drip IV to keep somebody asleep. You know what I mean? That's basically what your body's basically drugging you to go to sleep, right? Let's look at it that way. Fun little nugget for you guys. Certain foods such as sweet potatoes, almonds, oats, honey, and turkey encourage natural melatonin production. That's usually why we're sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner. So you guys tell me, if we could get away with not using an actual supplement, would it make more sense to just eat more of these foods so that the body is supported in creating its own natural production? Yeah, that just kind of makes sense, right?
Isn't it true also that if you supplement with melatonin, your body stops producing it as much naturally?
Yes, that is true. Because remember, melatonin is technically a hormone. If we want to look at it like that, it's technically a hormone. So just like anything else, let's use testosterone for a male, for an example. If we start utilizing endogenous or exogenous testosterone, the natural testosterone levels are going to fall down. That's typically why I will utilize something like HCG with those athletes, so that natural test production, the pituitary glands are able to talk to the testes and keep it produced. So with this, and we'll get into that in a second. We'll get into that in a second. So any other questions on this specific graph right here from anybody? Cool. Here's some supplements. If we're going to supplement, here's some supplements that are going to be good for staying asleep and falling asleep, because we need both, right? We need both here. And if you're my athletes, you've probably heard me talk a ton of times about magnesium for restlessness. More often times than not, assuming circadian rhythm is good, magnesium is that, or restlessness is stemming from a magnesium deficiency. I see that pretty much 9 times out of 10. I won't say every time, but pretty much 9 times out of 10, it's stemming from a magnesium deficiency. So what I would say with these, if I'm going to supplement with somebody, I'm going to pair one supplement for falling asleep with one supplement for staying asleep. Now, I have done the melatonin and magnesium combo before, and Jesus Christ, it is lights out. Lights out. You don't even have a chance. So everybody done writing these down? I'm going to give you guys a sec to write down these ones. These are amazing supplements, by the way. These are all amazing supplements. Melatonin supplementation, we do want to be careful with, because your body can stop producing it naturally, and then you kind of get into a funk here. But we can talk about utilizing it and cycling it, right? So that natural production can come back, which we can just tackle that right now real quick, and then I'll get on it later. If I'm taking melatonin 3 milligrams a night, and then it's not working, and then I start taking 5, and then I'm like, shit, man, I have to take so much melatonin. Well, couldn't I stop taking melatonin and start increasing the amount of sweet potato, almonds, oats, honey, and turkey in my diet, so that my body is naturally being supported to produce its melatonin again? Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Again, my interpretation of what I would do if I was supplementing with melatonin, and then I built up this crazy tolerance that I needed to regulate. That would be my way of doing it. Is everybody done writing these down? If you're going to write them down, if anybody needs me to pause real quick, just say pause. Cool. I see a couple people still writing. Okay. Moving on. Here's a really interesting one, and I'm going to get into this with age limits or age brackets of supplementing melatonin. Let's talk about what makes the most amount of sense. So newborns barely produce any melatonin, which is why they literally scream 24/7 and do not sleep, right? So melatonin peaks in early childhood. Do you guys notice how children will sleep all the fucking time, right? Kids are, you put your kid on he's out, right? No matter what. You pick your kid up for 10 minutes, they're asleep. So as puberty occurs, that's when we start seeing natural declines in melatonin. And it's going to continue to decline all the way down to here. So I want one of you guys to answer this. If we were going to use melatonin as a supplement and not really have to worry about building up a tolerance, what age would we be able to start doing that?
Like 30 or 40.
Yeah, 30, 40s, 50s, right? Melatonin's super low. So if our body's already lowering its natural ability, I don't see a reason, right? It's like a 50-year-old guy going on hormonal replacement therapy, right? Natural test levels are already crashed, so we're just going to supplement with it and not give a shit about anything else, really. Okay, does that make sense? Cool. So it would make the least amount of sense to utilize melatonin as a supplement with what age bracket?
Early childhood.
Well, well, yes. I would say anything before 30, right? Anything before 30, if we can get away with not using it, I would rather not, because you have all of this still, right? What makes the most amount of sense? You guys are going to notice that is the question that I ask pretty much every single week, because that's really what it comes down to. Critical thinking. Take some data and apply it. What makes the most amount of sense? So I'm going to ask some questions, I think. Yes, I am. I'm going to ask some questions on this next slide, and I want a different person to answer each one of them. Keep in mind, there are absolutely no wrong answers. This is just your own interpretation of your data that you have already learned in this slide. So who wants to answer the first one? When is and notice how every single one of these most optimal is in quotes. So when is the most optimal time to train?
Noon.
Noon. Yeah, between 12 and 3. When is the most optimal time to wake up?
Between 6 and 9.
7 or 8. Okay. When is the most optimal time to stop caffeine intake for the day?
2 o'clock, 2, 3 o'clock.
I'd say, yeah, I say 2 to 3. That's my personal preference. I don't think I actually covered that one in the earlier slides, but yeah, I typically don't like caffeine in past 3 o'clock. Absolute max. Absolute max.
Can I make a comment on that?
Absolutely.
Of caffeine. So I read an interesting article. I'd have to go back and like actually find the research, but it was talking about how people who like delay their caffeine intake in the morning, like have better effects from caffeine because of the cortisol levels and how they peak at 8. Like if you drink caffeine before that, then it like you're not getting as good of effects from your natural cortisol levels because you're putting caffeine.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really interesting thing for like coffee drinkers. Like you'll
Yeah.
actually get more out of drinking caffeine if you don't drink it when you immediately wake up in the morning.
I mean, what do you guys think? What makes the most amount of sense? That makes a hell of a lot of sense to me.
Okay, can I speak on this real quick too? Because sorry,
Everybody.
I can't have my camera. Yeah. I just recently, Nick, like I checked in with you this morning. I just recently pretty much after coming home from vacation, I didn't have much caffeine and I pretty much just completely came off of it. And not only has like my energy level obviously been better because it's more of like my natural energy, but also my digestion just been like a hell of a lot better too, just from not having caffeine in the morning. I'm like limiting 1 coffee pre-workout, which is like right around 10:30 or like 11 every day. And it's helped so much with my energy levels too.
So I want to ask you this though, Ken, just for reference of this being a circadian rhythmic topic. What did you do a shit ton on vacation? What'd you get a lot of?
Vitamin D. I was in the sun like all day.
A
So
ton of sun exposure. So again, if we're having somebody who's over caffeinated and overstressed, and we take them out of that environment and just literally go sit in the sun for a week, she's coming back fully optimized, full energy, great circadian rhythm, great sleep cycle, no need for caffeine because natural energy levels are through the roof. We have a biological connection to the sun. And it's really important that we always remember that and we truly harness the full power of that. Thanks, Ken. What is the most optimal time to go to sleep?
10:30, 10:30.
Right on the money, Brooke. Right on the money. I say in bed by 10, asleep by 10:30. Most optimal. Okay. When is the most optimal time to go outside? Trick question.
As soon as you wake up.
Well, what if you wake up and it's dark?
Isn't it
Anytime
right?
that you can.
It's when like the sun first starts coming up because the infrared light is right.
Well, is that the most optimal time to go outside altogether? So
I
this,
would
this one's a
say-
trick question.
Go outside
All the
all
time.
day long, all the time.
Okay.
All day.
Who else?
I say all day, all the time.
Whenever you can.
Okay. Yeah. Anytime there's sunlight. That would be what I would deem as the most optimal. Any time we can go outside and get sun is going to be the most optimal. But if we wanted to say like what's the most important, I would deem most important being those like first early morning. Like I want you guys and your clients to have exposure of their eyes to the sun before any sort of screens. Yes, that makes sense to everybody. That is going to be the #1 ticket there. All right. Now, when is the most optimal time for supplementation? Like, you know, any sleep or stay asleep enhancers. When's the most optimal time?
Before bed.
Okay. Why?
Yeah, I don't know. The amount of time it takes to digest it is like
Hormone release.
30 minutes to an hour. I don't know.
Well, so what is supplementation in the first place? What are we referencing here? What supplements are you referencing?
I'm thinking of magnesium right off the bat.
Okay, so magnesium, melatonin. So let's look a little bit wider on the scope of win, right? Because you're thinking win as a 24-hour clock. Well, what if we pull it into an age bracket, right? So when's the most optimal time to supplement there?
Well, with melatonin, we talked about like after 30.
Yeah. Well, what makes the most amount of sense to you based off of the graphs and stuff we saw? I agree with you, but does that make the most amount of sense? Yeah.
I mean, if it's naturally declining, then why
Yep.
not supplement with it, right?
100%. That's what makes the most amount of sense. But so when we ask the question, like, when's the most optimal time for supplementation, as coaches, it's really important for us to analyze every scope of win, right? Because win can be 30 minutes before bed. It can also be a time and an age. It can also be a cycle. Most optimal time is every 3 weeks and then a break, right? So there can be so many different subcategories of win. So when it comes to us coaches giving people protocols, we should be able to like scope out multiple times. Does that make sense? So a few of these were just trick questions just to get some conversations going. You guys pretty much nailed it. Now, this is the last slide. Last slide. Putting it all together. This is my interpretation. I think we got Socrates here. I don't know who that is. I literally just Googled optimized body and put the picture on here. I don't know. So putting it all together, my interpretation for optimizing an athlete. I would love to see my athlete waking up around 6 a.m., going for a morning walk and getting direct infrared sunlight exposure for their skin and their retinas, etc. I would like my athlete training between 12 and 3, athlete cutting off caffeine consumption and or stressors. That's huge. By 3 to 4 p.m. max. 4 p.m. absolute max. Like I prefer 3. I do not want any caffeine in before 4. Screens put away around 8:30 p.m. So if you notice 8:30 p.m. and then the second one after it, athlete in bed by 10 to 10:30, ready to sleep. I want that exposure to screen and artificial light gone about 2 hours before bed. This is where blue light glasses can be so optimal, right? These on my face, these are blue light glasses. I wear these 24. I wear them to the freaking mall. I have them on my face for so long, I forget about them, because my entire job is on screens. So I wear them to bed and then I put them away, everything like that. So if we have blue light glasses on, that's a huge one. If you guys have never used blue light glasses or had clients utilize them, if they work screens, dude, insane improvements within like a week because they no longer have that blue light exposure in their retinas. Melatonin usage should take breaks, but if you pair it with magnesium, that's a pretty solid combo. Like if I'm gonna supplement something naturally for sleep, I'm gonna do a melatonin magnesium combination. Typically, I'll do 3 to 5 milligrams of magnesium paired with about 3 to 5 milligrams of melatonin, and I will pair that with about 500 milligrams of magnesium. That seems to be what I have found to be solid dosages to help people get asleep. So we can do this because, like we said, supplementation with here. Let me stop sharing my screen now that we are done there. So supplementation with the melatonin and the magnesium, I would utilize that in some way, shape, or form if, say, I had somebody who had a really terrible sleep cycle and I was trying to just regulate it for a couple of nights. So like, oh, I'm not tired at 10. I'm like, great. At 9:30, I want you to pop a melatonin and magnesium. By 10, dead. Literally dead. Probably don't even have a pulse at that point because they're just not used to having melatonin secretion happening then. And I'll do that for maybe, let's just say I do that for a week. And then after that week, I pull them back. I see if they can sleep. If not, we can add those dietary measures in place so that they start naturally having the support to produce melatonin. And then we can just kind of like, just think about it as like a jump start to get them into the optimized cycle that we want them to be in. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions? Well, that's how you know it was a good presentation, huh? Any comments? Any other interpretations of data? Anybody just want to say something back so that they can understand it more?
I just have like a comment, and like I didn't want to ask it as a question because it's kind of a stupid question, but I know it's like out there, but you know, you were saying how like we have like this biological connection with like the sun and how being in the sun affects our circadian rhythm so much. But like the entire presentation, like if someone was blind, for example, and couldn't like see the sun, like how would they then sync their circadian rhythm to like the light and the dark and things like that?
That's an amazing question. I don't know.
That's why I didn't ask
let's-
it. I'm
let's
like,
let's get some people in here. What do you guys think? What makes the most amount of sense? If we had a blind person and we were trying to optimize their circadian rhythm, what could we do? My initial thought out the gate would be still waking them up at a certain time and getting them outside so they are at least exposed to sun, because your body, like there's a lot more biological processes in your body than just your eyesight, right? So what makes the most amount of sense? It makes sense to me that if we got that individual outside in the sun and in the heat multiple times a day and then pulled them away from that, that we would be able to kind of like physically bio-identify with the fact that the sun's out, now the sun's not. It's a really interesting question. What does anybody else think? Anybody else have a possible interpretation there?
I actually have a blind client, and that's what she does. She gets up first thing in the morning. She goes outside, even if it's cold, she like bundles up. And then at nighttime, they actually, one way that she knows, other than just like her husband telling her, is they adjust the temperature in their house and it helps her sleep. So she knows, okay, when it gets colder in the house, like it's nighttime, and then in the mornings before he leaves for work, her husband messes with the thermostat. So while it's warmer, she's feeling that sunlight outside, the house is warmer. So that's one of the ways that she knows.
That's amazing.
Other than just, you know, being regulated.
That's amazing. Because what we talked about, guys, is that the body temperature is also a biological rhythm, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Your body actually has certain different temperatures in the morning and different temperatures at night. So that's awesome. That's super awesome. Anybody else?
I think too, like just because like they could still get benefit from the sun rays, even if they're not like they probably see like shadows, like light and dark, maybe like, and so or even
I don't know what blind people see.
right. Or even still, I'm thinking like, well, your brain, like vision is partly just like your brain getting those images and like processing them. So maybe those rays like still get to their retinas, even though they don't process vision.
That's actually a really good hypothesis. Really good. I mean, you don't have to, and also just to note on that, you don't have to see sunlight to get benefits from it. Vitamin D production is literally directly correlated to serotonin production. And we get a lot of transdermal absorption of vitamin D from the sun. It's our most powerful source of it. So even if you're blind, if you're not outside in the sun, like a certain quota throughout the day, you will experience lower levels of vitamin D and then therefore lower levels of serotonin production. That's not good, right? So this is where seasonal depression comes into play, right? The sun's out for a long time or not out for a long period of time. People start getting depressed. For you guys who have clients who get seasonal depression like that, I will typically dose vitamin D substantially higher. So I'll do like 10,000 IUs of vitamin D if somebody's feeling like a little depressed, a little off, they're not getting a ton of sunlight, things like that. And there's always a pretty gnarly 180 with that alone. And then the 95% of serotonin is actually produced in your gut. So the foods that you eat need to correlate with optimized gut health. Because I'm sure everybody here has been in the point where you're bloated, your digestion's off, and then you have terrible mental health and you feel like shit about yourself and you feel gross and you feel sad. There's a direct access between your brain and your gut. So really important to note on that just for the serotonin production aspect. Cool. Any other questions, comments before we sign off, dudes? Great call. Seriously.
I have a quick question, Nick. I'm not sure. I had to bounce out for like a 10-minute period, but I'm not sure if you guys covered about nootropics. So I had a question about nootropics because, you know, obviously I know we have talked about this too. It's just like, for me personally, like I have ADHD. I have a lot of clients on our team who have ADHD, things like that. They're also on like stimulants, but a lot of the times, like I've been looking a lot more into like nootropics and like how the brain in the morning, like if you're using nootropics that can support just like focus, things of that nature. Would that, in terms of like the effect on the body, would that have any kind of effect with like circadian rhythm, or is that more so like brain function for like focus and things of that nature?
Well, you tell me. So let's go back to our interpretation. So what is one thing that the circadian rhythms regulate? it regulates mental cognition, right? So if we have somebody who has an optimized circadian rhythm, and then they are also utilizing nootropics, good or bad? What do you think? What would just make the most amount of sense to you?
I'm thinking in terms of like the melatonin because it's like a supplementation, like
Well,
basically.
melatonin is not a nootropic, right? That's actually a
Right.
hormone that's being secreted by our body for us to go to bed.
Mhm.
So if we're looking at an actual nootropic, right? If we're optimized everywhere else and we're taking an additional supplement to further optimize our cognitive ability, I see no issue with that. I see no issue with that. I only see it improvements. And me personally, I prefer microdosing psilocybin. I do that for a lot of, I've even restored people's freaking periods utilizing it. After Audrey took it for a week and got her period back, remember when you did that? I've done that with 3 other people. They're just like, let's do every 2 days. And then within 2 weeks, like, oh my God, I have my period back. I'm like, cool. I have no science data behind it at all, but it fucking works.
Cool.
So, but yeah, but as far as like so I guess a good kind of quick hole here based off of that is like utilizing supplements to help further our cognition that aren't caffeine.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Right. So like nootropics and stuff, I don't see an issue with them. I would probably still cap their usage time right around the same as caffeine, right? Because I'm not trying to have your brain wired to the T and like super functioning 6-7 o'clock at night, right? That's our time where the brain does need to like shut down and start getting into that sleep. And that's why a nighttime routine is so crucial. Nighttime routines are everything for optimizing circadian rhythms. Cool. Great question, Ken. It was a really good one. I should have thought to cover that in the presentation and I didn't.
Last question here.
Yes.
With like, let's say, like we like to smoke weed before bed because it helps me knock out. Do you think that could potentially, because I'm sure it reduces like my cortisol, my natural cortisol levels and stuff, could that throw off my circadian rhythm?
So my interpretation of it is absolutely, and I would actually like Kendall to hop in on this because she's actually now not smoking weed before bed anymore and is seeing a ridiculous improvement. So Ken, do you just want to kind of like talk about what you felt differently from doing that?
Yeah, so I've like been pretty dependent on cannabis for like the past year, I would say, with smoking. So I'm gonna like disclose really quickly. I'm also on extended release Adderall because I have ADHD, so that's my diagnosis. And so when I got diagnosed and I started using a stimulant, I was like, oh, okay, now I can't go to sleep. So I was like, I'll just take my stimulant a lot earlier, which this call gave me so much perspective because I was taking a lot earlier in the day. But basically I was smoking at night so that I could pretty much go to sleep because my brain was still like, I'm a high functioning person anyway. It's just how my brain is, you know? And so I was kind of using the excuse of using weed, but when I was on vacation, I didn't have that option. So I was like, I just need to go to bed. And granted, it was also a different time zone too. So like I was ahead 3 hours than I usually would be. And I just like pretty much forced myself to go to sleep. I was like, I really don't have an option. I was waking up early to the sun and then literally going to sleep because it was dark outside. And it's been what, like 10 days now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 10 days. And my quality of sleep has been incredible. And I have not woken up to a phone alarm at all. And I'm waking up at like 6:15 every single day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that initial like weaning off of it would be hard because I noticed like if I don't smoke one night, I am like tossing and turning all night. But when I smoke, like I barely wake up. Like I'm rock solid. So that's why
I would argue like the same way we would handle anybody like coming off of something, right? We want to use something else to support the body while we're trying to wean off something. I would honestly argue if you dedicated an additional hour of your day to just being outside in the direct sunlight, you would probably wouldn't have that issue. And I've seen, and Kendall's a great example of this, right? Like she stopped smoking, she was out in the sun significantly more than she was. She came home rock solid, right? Because remember, the more we can connect with that sunlight throughout the day, I think the morning walk is the most crucial time of the day. I really do. I like that is like a staple in my routine now. But I think doing that and then saying like every hour you're doing check-ins, you have an alarm, you go, oh shoot. And then you go outside for a 15-minute walk in the direct sunlight. You do that multiple times a day, make sure you're wearing blue light glasses. I would assume you have a significantly easier time staying asleep.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question though. That's a really good question. Anybody else before we just head off this thing? I really appreciate you guys being super collaborative on this. That's what makes these calls as amazing as they are. Cool. All right. Well, everybody say peace sign for Instagram. 1, 2, 3. Yay. Cool. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you so much. I will talk with y'all next week. Next week, we are going to go over kind of just like calculating startup calories, macros, baselines, all of that stuff with your athletes, how to calculate carbs, fats, protein, everything in between. Cool. Gonna be a good one. Cool, guys. Have a great night. Thank you.